Bible Quiz!
Joshua and the walls of Jericho. And so we come to the first test of faith for Israel as they defeat the city of Jericho. We can see how God says to Joshua to be strong and take courage. Our lesson is described in Joshua chapters 5 and 6. When the people of Israel entered the land of Canaan, Joshua was their leader, a man chosen by God who had commanded, "Look, I have set the land before you. Go in and possess it." Canaan was a good land, flowing with milk and honey. But this beautiful land was filled with the wickedness of the Canaanites, people who lived there. In cities like Jericho, people worshipped evil and magic. God said these things were abominations, and the people who did them must be driven from the land. That was to be Joshua's task, and it was a tremendous challenge. But Joshua had God's promise. "As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. Be strong and very courageous." So Joshua, at God's command, led his people to the plains of Jericho. The great city of Jericho shut the gates when the inhabitants heard the Israelites were approaching. They were afraid of these people and hated their miracle-working God. But instead of changing their ways, Jericho prepared to resist. They gathered their weapons and got ready for war. Day and night the men of war kept watch from the top of the walls that surrounded the city. Nearby, the city of Jericho, Joshua looked at the walls so tall and thick and strong. He knew no human power could break them down, but Joshua remembered God had said, "No one will be able to stand before you all the days of your life." And as Joshua looked to the Lord for help, a strange thing happened. There stood a man with a sword drawn in his hand. And when Joshua asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" the man said, "I am the captain of the army of the Lord. Take your shoes off, for the place where you are standing is holy." Joshua obeyed with humble worship, and he listened carefully to all the instructions the Lord gave him. When Joshua returned to the camp, he called together his men. These men of Israel had sworn to obey Joshua as they had Moses. But as they listened to Joshua's orders, the men of Israel realized that obedience would test not only their loyalty to their leader, but their faith in the Lord as well. Surely no soldiers ever heard orders such as Joshua's men heard from their leader, but the men were encouraged when Joshua told them. The Lord said the walls of Jericho would fall down flat, and every man would go straight into the city. So the men of Israel prepared to obey. Inside the walls of Jericho, that alarm suddenly rang out. "The Israelites are coming!" To the walls, they shouted, as every man hurried to his place. From the top of the wall, Jericho's men of war watched tensely as the Israelites approached. First came armoured men, then something that looked very strange in the ranks of an army. 7 priests were blowing their trumpets continually, and following them, a mysterious object was hidden beneath rich blue coverings. What could it be? Only the people of Israel knew it was the Ark of the Lord, and it was there to remind them that the Lord went before them and the victory was in the Lord. Strange as it seemed, all the Israelites did was to march around the city in a quiet and peaceful way. Not a single word was spoken. The only sounds to be heard were the steady tramp of marching feet and the endless blasts of the priests' trumpets. The people of Jericho just stood still and watched in amazement as the long column of Israelites disappeared among the hills and returned to their camp. Jericho's fighting men were troubled and uneasy. What could it mean? Was it a trick of some kind? On the second day, the Israelites did exactly the same thing as they had done the day before. The priests carried the ark of the Lord around the city, 7 priests always blowing their trumpets before it, and armed men marching in front and the rear. The Israelites marched once around the city, then returned to the camp without anyone saying a single word. Every day for 6 days the same thing happened, and every day the people of Jericho watched and waited. Some were still fearful and troubled, remembering the things they had heard about Israel's Almighty God. But the others began to mock. These foolish Israelites, marching round and round the strong walls of Jericho, blowing their trumpets and carrying a mysterious box. Anyone could see they never get into the city that way. On the morning of the 7th day, the Israelites marched around the city as before. But then, instead of returning to their camp, they marched around a second time, and then again, and again, and again. 7 times the Israelites marched around the city. At the end of the 7th time, every man stopped and faced the walls, completely surrounding the city of Jericho. And suddenly the trumpet stopped. Every man waited for the Lord's appointed signal. A long blast of the trumpets. Then Joshua cried, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." And while the people of Jericho looked on, not knowing that their end had come, the people of Israel raised a great shout of victory. And the walls of the city fell down flat. The Israelites went straight into the attack of the city, just as the Lord had said, and they utterly destroyed all the evil that was in the city as God had commanded. But sure to their word, the 2 spies went to Rahab's house, which had not fallen down, and rescued all her family as they promised. Rahab and her family came to live in Israel and believed in God. After that time, wherever they went in the promised land, the Israelites had victory as long as they had faith in the Lord and obeyed his commands. God promised a life of victory for believers today on the same condition: have faith in the Lord, obey his commands, be strong and very courageous.